And today we take you back 9 years and remember an uprising at an Afghan jail that led to the deaths of hundreds of Taliban prisoners.
It's November 2001, and more than a month since President Bush announced that America and its allies were launching a military operation to rid Afghanistan of al-Qaeda and of its protectors, the Taliban.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
On November the 9th, the Taliban's opponents, the Northern Alliance, won their first major victory. Backed by America, they took the northern town of Mazar Sharif. For the Taliban, it was the beginning of the end.
The war is certainly going the opposition's way at the moment, thanks largely to America's ferocious bombardments. Yesterday, with air support, the opposition Northern Alliance captured the key city of Mazar Sharif, a stunning blow for the Taliban, and just maybe a turning point in the war.
4 days later, Taliban forces fled the capital, Kabul.
Like all retreating armies, they were edgy and tense. There were dozens of jeeps and trucks full of Taliban fighters and weapons trying to leave under cover of darkness. Only 2 days earlier, this fighter in the black turban had threatened to shoot us.
The Taliban held out longer in their last stronghold in the north, Kunduz. But by the 25th of November, that too had fallen. Western journalists who'd covered the battle for Mazar Sharif now flocked to Kunduz. But one journalist and his crew didn't go that day. Arnim Stout of the German regional broadcaster WDR.
For security reasons, we did not go like most of the other journalists to Kunduz that day because we had been advised that the road to Kunduz was unsafe and there could be Taliban around. We had quite a late breakfast and I thought, what shall we do with this kind of wasted day? And then said, well, okay, there are those 500 prisoners and it might be a good opportunity to have a background talk with them as there were no other journalists. And so we went to Kalai Jangir and asked for permission to see the prisoners.
Kalai Jangir is a huge 19th century fortress in the desert outside Mazar Sharif, the headquarters of the northern opposition strongman Abdul Rashid Dostum. The prisoners there were foreigners, mainly Arabs and Pakistanis, but others too, who'd been fighting with the Taliban in Kunduz. They'd given themselves up, thinking that they'd be freed. Instead, Dostum had ordered that they be brought to Kalai Jangir for questioning. The prisoners were angry and they were scared. Arnim Stout didn't know it, but he and his colleagues had walked into a situation far more dangerous than the road to Kunduz.
When we were just about to get the permission, and we would have been in the middle of the prisoners then, 10 minutes later, then all of a sudden I heard the explosion of, I think 2 grenades, and then immediately after that, gunfire, small arms fire started, and quite a violent battle broke out just from 1 second to the other.
The Taliban prisoners had overcome their captors. They hadn't been properly searched. Some were still armed. 2 CIA agents were in the Northern Alliance fortress at the time, interrogating them. Arnim Stout recalls those first chaotic moments.
I hit the ground, lay there for maybe 5 minutes. Then I realized, okay, this is not going to finish within another 5 minutes probably. And I grabbed my sat phone, which was next to me, and made a run for the main building where my cameraman was already then.
And what happened then?
And then a guy ran into this house. He was dressed like an Afghan. He had a Kalashnikov. He had a pistol in his hand, and this guy turned out to be an American, somehow disguised as an Afghan with a beard. And he said, well, he's a military advisor, and I immediately thought, okay, he's probably working for the CIA. And he was my first and only source of information what really had happened. And he said, it's an uprising, and they've got all the weapons they need because the weapons store is right in the courtyard where they are.
It was Mike Spann, wasn't it, and Dave Tyson, who were the 2 CIA agents.
Yes, he was Dave Tyson's.
It was his colleague Mike Spann, wasn't it, who was interrogating them at the time.
They were doing it together. There is video footage of that. It shows prisoners on their knees with their hands tied behind their back, being questioned by the two CIA guys.
That footage was later broadcast. In it, Mike Spann asks one of the Taliban prisoners, who later turns out to be an American citizen, John Walker Lind, if he's a member of the IRA. Then the other agent tells a kneeling Lind he's got to decide if he wants to live or die.
The problem is he needs to decide if he wants to live or die and die here. We can only help those guys who want to talk to us. We can only get the Red Cross to help so many guys.
As Arnim and his crew, now with David Tyson, took shelter in the northern compound of the fortress, away from where the prisoners were, David Tyson asked if he could use WDR's satellite phone, Arnim now knows, to ring the American embassy in neighbouring Uzbekistan.
We were standing next to him while he was calling because he hadn't got the chance to hide somewhere and do the talk secretly. So we have recorded most of the talks as well. And he told them, make it very clear you can't come and bomb the place, because friends and foe were so close together. And he said it like 2 or 3 times, don't come and bomb the place. But that's exactly what happened like 2 hours later. We heard the sound of the incoming bombs or missiles. You hear it and you know, okay, now it's another couple of seconds and then hopefully it doesn't explode next to us. The earth shook under our feet. I don't know what kind of missiles or bombs they used then, but it was like, I think it was like 5 or 6 attacks and it was 2 explosions at a time.
But despite the air attacks, the fighting raged on. Later, more US and British special forces arrived. But as the sun began to set, Arnim Stout and his colleagues knew they had to escape. With David Tyson, they scrambled across a roof, then up the steep fortress walls, before escaping across an open field to tell the rest of the world what was happening.
A gun battle is still raging tonight at General Dostum's fort, just 10 miles from here. It all demonstrates the fragility of his control over events, not to mention the desperation of the Taliban as they are forced from power. Angus Roxburgh, BBC News, in Mazar Sharif.
It was 4 days later when Arnim Stout finally went back into the fortress of Kalai Jangi. He remembers the courtyards strewn with dead fighters and dead horses. But still a handful of Taliban survivors fought on.
They were hidden in the cellar, and a Red Cross guy, an Afghan Red Cross guy, went in there and he was trying to get dead bodies out of there, but he wasn't aware that there were people alive, and they dragged him in, I think, and killed him.
In the end, the Northern Alliance poured cold water into the cellar to force the last 80 Taliban survivors to surrender. Meanwhile, hundreds lay dead.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the most strange and the most... how would you say, the experience was there was a dead Taliban and his face was pretty much intact and the upper part of his body, and it was like as if he were asleep, and but the lower part of his body, he was just, cut into two pieces. A tank had run over him. That was very hard to take, and I looked at it for a second and then just turned away.
There were calls for independent inquiries into what happened at Kalai Jangi. Some called it a massacre. It remains one of the bloodiest single episodes of the Afghan war.